Okay, and we're live. Welcome, Simon Watson. Thanks very much for coming along to the first IOSH West of Scotland Health and Safety podcast, video and sound content.
No problem. Thanks very much for the invite. I'm glad to be here.
So, a bit of an introduction about you, Simon. You're the Head of Safety with Siemens Mobility Limited, Rail Infrastructure UK. And you're also my former boss and first interviewee of the podcast, just to add a bit of extra pressure.
Fantastic.
So I'm going to start off, Simon, just going right back to the start. If you want to tell us a bit about your background, where you started out, your kind of earliest memories, where you grew up, and we'll start from there.
Wow. Okay. Let's see. Where did I start? Where did I grow up? Well, I had a slightly different childhood to a lot of people, but perhaps quite similar to a lot of people that end up in health and safety. I've come from a military background myself, and my father was in the army. So we spent probably a good 20 or so years moving around the world with him, having lived in most places in the UK, Northern Ireland. We've lived in Germany. We lived in Cyprus, so we've had quite a good kind of varied travels around the world, which I think really interesting childhood. You know, for me, it was quite disruptive. I think, you know, every couple of years, picking up, moving home, changing schools, and I was probably one of those ones that didn't adjust too well to that, and probably rebelled a little bit, and at the end of it, didn't really come out with an appetite for having a good early, you know, schoolhood, qualifications, education, and I think I can still remember now. I left with 1 C, 5 Ds, 4 E's, and an F for my GCSEs, and my C was in drama. So I don't know what that says, but yeah, that was before it became an academic drama course. I think back in the mid '90s, early '90s. So anyway. I think it was a bit like following your father's footsteps.
Yep.
I joined the army at a young age, at 16 and a half, and I went through training, and obviously I went to go and join. I say obviously, but I went to join the infantry because that's who would accept me with my qualifications at that stage, and I spent just under 10 years there. Had a bit of travel, worked in all over the UK, but had the opportunity to see some operations in Northern Ireland, in Kosovo, and got some great experiences of working in Jamaica, in Belize, spent some time in Gibraltar, spent quite a bit of time in Africa. So really well-rounded experience, I think, in the military, which, you know, it's interesting. I don't have a crazy story about why I got into health and safety towards the end of my career, and it wasn't a planned end of my career. I injured myself. I broke my legs quite badly, and during rehab, the physical rehab, not for any other reason, I was talking to one of a colleague there, a peer, and he was telling me that when he was going to leave, he was going to get into health and safety. And although we've done quite a bit in the army in health and safety and dynamic risk management, you know, as you would expect, yeah, it did perk my interest, so to speak. I actually felt like it was something that I could get quite passionate about. And if it wasn't for that chance meeting that would have been 2003 or so, 17 odd years ago, I probably wouldn't be here today. Potentially, I'd either still have a career in the military, or I'd have done something different, potentially altogether. And I do remember the conversation around you know, what's it like? You know, what do you really do? And he said to me, you're in lots of conflict. You know, there's loads of arguing. And I thought, brilliant. I like conflict. I've come from the army. I'll be great at it. And you soon find out that that's not the way to go in the job. But certainly it does. It's a job that keeps you entertaining and certainly keeps you passionate. And yes, that's really the start of my journey into real health and safety.
Awesome. That's really interesting, Simon. Can you tell us about your first safety job then? The first role that you moved into a health and safety focused job?
Sure. I mean, before I left the army and I was still in rehab, I had a small period of time, 6 to 12 months, where I really couldn't do what would have been my typical job. And so I'd only done some basic, I'd done my IOSH general certificate at that stage in 2004, I think. And I went and seen essentially the quartermaster of the site I was working at. That's the person who's responsible for the administration for the barracks. And I said, look, you have the responsibility for doing health and safety, which, let's be honest, it was a couple of policies on the wall back in that time for the military. And I said, let me do it for you. You know, give me something to do, keep me occupied. And so I went off with no idea what I was doing, but had a bit of an interesting time trying to figure out what it really was, other than just a bit of paperwork on a wall. It was very different in that time, certainly in the military as well, and having to work through 2 sets of legislation. But it was it gave me 6 to 12 months or so of trying to figure out what it was really about, and a little bit of experience. After that, I had a great opportunity to go and work for Skanska. And I went to work for Skanska, but specifically on what the North London Gas Alliance, which was a large-scale gas mains replacement network program,
yep,
all across London. Really good job. My first opportunity to work with health and safety professionals, and to be quite humbled and grounded, and having the confidence to learn from some great people.
Yeah.
And I think as well, when you're learning from people, I learned as much from my peers in health and safety as I did from actually some really solid supervisors. I always say, it's good to be a sponge when you don't know a lot, and just to sit back, observe and learn. And you tend to find out who the people are that you can trust quite quickly, who the people that actually enjoy mentoring, and that's not necessarily your colleagues in the same role as you. That's people that, I had some great construction guys that and site agents that have been doing the job 20, 30 years, and I would stick by their side and learn as much from them as possible. And so I had some really privileged opportunity at that time to work with people and to learn with people and to understand that craft of working on the gas line. So it was really good. Again, what was next for me? After 3 years, I had a bit of a change in life circumstances. Was going through a bit of a dilemma of what's next for me. And at that time, my cousin was working for Worley Parsons in Australia, and we had a 50th birthday party. It was her auntie or my auntie and her mum. However, we met, and she convinced me that the market was booming. It was 2008. It was the start of the next boom cycle for mining and oil and gas in Australia. And at that stage, I was lucky enough that a company over there, a big heavy civil engineering company, was doing a kind of global recruitment tour, working their way around the Middle East, America and Europe. And I'd put my name in the hat and came over, and they came over, and we had an interview. Really, it was probably the most unique interview I had. And when I went in for this conversation or this interview, sat with the 2 directors, and they said, "Yep, CV looks fine. I'm confident you've got the qualifications. I can see them here. We don't want to talk about that. We're fairly confident you can do the job. I want to see if you fit with the business and your intentions for wanting to come to Australia." And for that, it was more about them. It was, we're comfortable you can do the job and you can do a good job. I want to know if you're going to survive, and one thing that sticks with me with this conversation was they were trying to sell a job to me, a certain area, and I actually didn't realize what it was, but my response probably wasn't the best response, and it was, "How would you like to go to a place called the Pilbara? You're in the desert every day. You're in a remote site. You wake up in the morning covered in dust, and you go to bed covered in red dust. It's absolutely brilliant." To which point I reflected back on my military experience and thought, this sounds absolutely dreadful. And I didn't quite understand when they talked about camps. You stay in a fly camp. These were establishments that were set up to work in remote mining. And I didn't fully understand that. So I said, it doesn't sound particularly appetizing. So if you've got anything in Sydney or Melbourne, I'd rather take that opportunity. which actually turned out to be pretty good because they did have an opportunity in Sydney, and that's the one I ultimately got. But those camps we'll talk about later. But it's not in a tent; it's actually in quite good accommodation that have been built in these mining facilities. But so yeah, I got opportunity to go to Sydney. Visas came through pretty quickly, which is really good. I mean, it was boom time, so they're opening the doors to anybody. That's probably why they let me in. And yeah, so went to Australia on what was called the Water Delivery Alliance. Right. And I picked up it was an advisor role, but you were given areas. Yeah. And the job was to connect a new desalination plant that was being built to the Sydney water distribution network. And so we had to create a new pipeline. So it was a twin 3-meter diameter pipeline. So it was pretty big pipeline. We had to take it 25 miles from a place called Kaima to Erskineville. So Kaima is an island off Botany Bay in Sydney. Yeah. And where they have a lot of industrial type facilities. And it was really exciting. You know, it was really, I'd never seen anything in this sense, but it was really big, heavy civil engineering. We had about 20 tunnels we had to shaft and drive. We built a custom barge in Singapore, shipped it over. This was a $40 million custom barge, to the only one in the world at the time to twin lay 2 3-meter pipes at the same time. So, you know, all the design work was incredible to actually just get stuck into something. One of the most exciting times was recovering the tunnel boring machine at the end of the job. Yeah. And that was to actually tunnel underneath Botany Bay, dredge off the top covering, block the tunnel with a concrete reinforced slab, and then send divers down to inflate giant balloon bags underneath this 40 ton TBM machine, float it to the top of the ocean, and then use a giant jacket barge and a couple of 200-300 ton cranes and offload this. So really, none of this stuff was happening anywhere else in the world at the time. It was all
once in a lifetime type project.
All mega projects, yeah. And I guess that was the great experience about Australia at that time, in boom time. Yeah. The government and the mining and oil and gas companies were spending 30, 40, 50, 60 billion dollars on a 4, 5, 6 year project. So, these were the kind of biggest and the best experiences that you'd get. And for me, that was an opportunity to be selfish. I made some selfish decisions there to focus on my career. Mm-hmm. So after that project, I came halfway through that project, and after just over a year, I was asked to go to Western Australia, same company. Okay. And again, because of the boom market, they'd grown rapidly. They'd won about $4 or $5 billion of work doing large wharfs. These were 2-3 kilometers long out into the ocean, 60 meters high, and they were to be receiving. It was all about increasing the capacity of the iron ore commodity market. And so this is about being able to get in more ships to get as much ore off and get it to China, right? And that was essentially what it was about. And it was boom time, really exciting, 100-meter square jacket barges that are 80 meters in the air, using multiple crane lifts, and just really quite an exciting time. But this was in a place called the Pilbara, and I looked after most of the jobs that were in that kind of western part of Australia, but most of my work was 2,000 k's away from where I lived. So I'd often be on a plane in the morning for a 2-hour plane flight, get to work, spend a day or two, then come back, and then a couple of days later head back out again. And that was another really interesting job, because I've gone from project work to being responsible for an area on multiple projects. And actually it was, I had to spend some time finding my feet about what was required of me, because you're moving into a very different type of role. Yeah. And I ended up figuring out that I had this little kind of saying, and it was around establishing policy. What's the governance that I need to put in place to make sure that policy is going to work? How do I provide guidance around those two aforementioned items? and then what's the assurance process that I have in place, the mechanism to make sure that all that is working smoothly. So that was that policy, governance, guidance, and assurance. And I still live by that now. You know, if you can get those 4 things right, it's a really good staple framework for kind of giving yourself confidence that you're doing the right thing, that you're providing the right level of support, direction, but also you're giving the company assurance that you're doing and the function is delivering the way it's supposed to be delivering. So that gave me some confidence that I had a structure in place and was able to deliver to that. And then for me, after a couple of years there, it was, you know, there were other organizations that were doing bigger work and some more exciting work and wider than Western Australia. So I got a great opportunity at that time. In fact, I was in a privileged position where I could look around with the experience I just gained over the last 3 years to pick and choose a little bit. The market was still booming. There was still plenty of opportunity to go around. And you know, I got the chance to choose the company really, and the opportunity of who I could go and work for. And so this is one of my first real strong mentors came about, a gentleman called Nick Martin. So if you're listening, thank you very much for the help you provided me over the years, and you still do this day and time. So had a great time there with a fantastic mentor, and I learned an awful lot from Nick, and it's probably a really enjoyable 3.5 years there. And again, same sort of work, but this time we were involved in building gas plants. We're involved in, and that's downstream work, not upstream. We built some aluminum refineries, some petrochemical facilities, hospitals, prisons. We sunk Perth rail station so they could build some high rises on a place between Perth and what was known as Knightsbridge, so they could do something with what was essentially wasted space. So again, oversight of multiple projects, and a really, I guess, just a really exciting time and lots of experience to gain, and lots of great people to learn from. After that, I had, again, an opportunity to be selfish about myself. A great position came up to take on a general manager position. It was a general manager, zero harm and quality. And that was for a company, and that was, again, predominantly Western Australia. Unfortunately, that role lasted about 1.5 years, and then I was made redundant. There was the mining boom was it goes in a boom bust cycle over in Australia. So there's normally a 7 to 8 year boom bust cycle, and the bust cycle materialised, and in the space of a few weeks across Western Australia, I think there's about 80,000 people that lost their jobs in the space of a few weeks, and the market is still not recovered now. So I was made redundant. You know, it's a tough time, especially when everyone's being made redundant in your market and the opportunities are, you know, far and few between. You do go through some reflection. You know, you think, was it me? You know, did I do something wrong? Why was I the first? You know, why were we the first to go? And I think the reality was it was such a mass, you know, redundancy. You know, the whole business that I was in, all of the leadership team were made redundant in the same day. So, and that the model there was, because of the rapid growth, it was a decentralized business model across Australia and New Zealand. And then obviously with the retraction of the market, they went back to a centralized business model. And so all of those regional posts were essentially made redundant. So tough time, but some rational thinking, and some opportunities that started to materialize. I wasn't out of work for very long, perhaps 3 weeks. I probably should have taken some more time to relax. Got the opportunity from a colleague I knew who had moved for the same reason, had moved to the Middle East.
Okay. And
into Qatar, and was building a Navy base as part of those. There was a huge greenfields project for a port in Qatar, in a place called Masayid. And there was an element of that, which was building this new port. It had been going for a little while. It had been going for about 1 year and a bit. And they were having some challenges, and so I was asked, you know, got some opportunity knocks. Do you fancy coming over and doing some work in the Middle East? And I thought, you know, why not? My primary reason was there's no work in Australia right now, and it's, you know, I'm used to working in the desert, it's very similar work, and so yeah, got the opportunity and went over there, and that was another different chapter of my life for a couple of years until that project finished. It was a really interesting time, and a really challenging time. Challenging on the fact that you've got, you know, culture, and you've got multiple nationalities, and you've got a huge varying degrees of skill set and competence and education, and just life experiences. And that's where challenges lie. Sometimes you think what we're doing is not particularly sophisticated, and it doesn't need to be. But, you know, trying to communicate with 5 different nationalities and 5 different languages, you know, sometimes having a 10-minute conversation might take, you know, 30, 40 minutes to have.
Yeah.
But I do remember on a couple of occasions, and about going to the airport to fly out on a break, and coming back in the arrivals lounge, and seeing all of the international guys coming in, might be the Philippines, India, Pakistan, and that's typically where we'd get our labor workforce from. And the penny dropped for me on a couple of occasions of the experience that these people have when they were all stood around an escalator looking at it. I couldn't work out what they were looking at, and I kind of keeping a look at the corner of my eye, and I realized they were trying to work out what it was, and how to get on it.
Yeah.
So, you know, they were kind of stop starting and moving about, and it was really, you know, it just made me think that tomorrow these men will potentially be on my project with 1,000 pieces of plant and equipment in a very, you know, dangerous, inherently dangerous environment, with no experience whatsoever. And so that was a real eye-opener for me, and how you can probably hear some of the tragic stories on the news at that time. And the reality was, you are taking people that have not experienced anything of this magnitude, and coming into that sort of dangerous environment. And I think something that stuck by me in that culture, and actually it's probably stuck with me since then in sort of how I approach things, and that's not setting your people up to fail.
Yeah.
That was something that stuck with me a lot. And I give an example by that. I remember, you know, we regularly hear in the industry in Qatar that somebody else has unfortunately lost their life. They've been run over by an excavator or a vehicle or a dump truck, but when you hear about what this was, and we're starting to see some of this behavior, is that people would sleep underneath excavator tracks, underneath dump trucks. They would sleep in all, you know, they would sleep under overhangs of excavations that perhaps had a bit of a, a bit of a collapse and were cordoned off, or they'd sleep in the utility pipes that had just been laid because there'd be a draft going through them. And at the time, the mechanism was, you know, if you do that, we're going to dismiss you, you're going to lose your job. And it didn't work. And when I thought about it, it was, you know, why are people doing that? Why are they knowingly putting themselves at risk? Because it was known that this is a risk. And when we looked at it, and I asked a few people, it was, well, you know, where they were going to sleep was actually right near the place where their bus was coming to pick people up, to be taken to their food, to the food hall, or to be taken home. And it's a quite large site. It takes a long time for the vehicles to move around, but you don't want to miss your bus because you don't want to miss your lunch. And it was as simple as that. And what they would do is they would be in the 50-degree sun with no shelter. And so they would seek the shelter wherever they could. You know, what's the chances of a vehicle driving off versus having a severe dehydration issue by not being in the shade? So by not setting people up to fail, we put shade shelters at the pickup points, you know, bus stops, right? But we put water in them and fans and so on. And before you know it, we stopped having people sleeping under vehicles. And for me, that's a very simple of not setting people up to fail. So yeah, and I think that lesson goes to there. If you treat people with a bit of humanity and a bit of respect, wherever you are in the world, it always goes a long way to making sure people do the right thing by you.
And that's a great message, Simon. It probably brings us neatly on to the next question, which is, what's the biggest challenge you've faced in your career so far?
Oh, biggest challenge. You know, there's a few that really stand out for me. I think that there was, you know, thinking of strategic, so there's life challenges, right? There's you know, where am I going next? You know, being made redundant was a huge challenge to overcome and think about what that was, what the impact was. And I worked my way through that. I think something for me was, you know, having left school with no education.
Yeah.
And then starting to gain life experience and you know, a long time in the military and having some education there. Most of my education was picked up from learning and having great mentors. But I realized I needed to do more than that. And it wasn't a particularly strong suit of mine, but I had a burning desire to start off, I guess, this journey of learning. And I started to get, I think I got a bit of an appetite for it, because what I started to see was the experiences I gained, I could now apply and understand the thinking behind it. And so I've got the experience, I could apply the theory. And I think the two of them together worked quite nicely for me. And I think sometimes when you come out with a university degree and maybe you work your way straight from university to a master's, and then you don't have the experience, it can be somewhat a challenge. And I think challenges in their own ways. But for me, I think my education journey was a daunting one, but one I knew that I needed to take. It's been going for about 15 years. And I first started off after my certifications in 2004. I did some Prince 2 work to understand about project management and controlled environments. I think that went really well to a lot of what we do in our business is we're managing small projects, right? Whether that's on a project itself or you're doing activities that need to be managed. I then had a spate of, I believe it was planning supervision back a long time ago, as it's moved through CDM coordination, and now it's no longer something that is a defined role and title. But and then I embarked on my MVQ4 at that stage. Then I went over to Australia, and then I did a diploma in Australia. I wanted to make sure, at that time I was slightly aware that I didn't have the Australian experience. So I did a diploma, and I guess it was valuable to do the diploma because you always learn something out of it, and you learn from other people as part of your education. But I think at the same time, you can understand quite quickly, you know, wherever you work in those types of first country world, that actually it's much of a likeness. There are some differences, but predominantly the same. And the way we care for people, you know, is the same in England and United Kingdom as it is in Australia, and it is in America, and as it is in Europe. So there wasn't a huge learning factor there. So I wouldn't let that put you off if anyone's ever considering a move somewhere like Australia. I think you can pick it up quite quickly. I then did some learning on project management. So I did another diploma in project management, and then still had the appetite for it. At that time, I think the MVQ4 diploma had become a level 5 MVQ or part of the level 6 framework, I believe. And so I did the upgrade for that, just to keep myself in touch with what was going on. And then towards the end of Australia, before the move to the Middle East, I really wanted to have a look at what an MBA could offer me. And I'm really glad I embarked on that with the Institute of Australian Business. And I think, you know, people that think, you know, it's a general tool, and there's a lot of opinion about whether it adds value or not. But for me, I think I got to look at things in a different light, in a different slant. I wasn't going to change my career. You know, I was going to be, you know, a safety professional, but it let me understand the decision-making process for, you know, more about economics and why we do what we do, why we spend the way we spend, what's the impacts of, the government policy on business decisions, and then how could that affect us in what we do? What's the byproduct of a bad business decision or a poor economy on the impact of keeping people safe at work? Got to understand a bit around, you know, strategic supply chain network and how for me, I said a penny dropped a little bit at that stage, which is kind of starting to shape my philosophy since then, is that what we do in our capacity, in our advisory function is, you know, the work we do is the outputs, is the output of a lot of other things. We're managing the residual effect of things. You know, you can't put safety in a glass and fill a glass up and say, safety, this is what we do, because that substance doesn't really exist, because it's a byproduct. And so I've learned to, and the way I like to operate now is to say, what does a business do? How does it do it effectively? And is the byproduct of that going to give us good outcomes? Is it going to give us good safety outcomes, good quality outcomes? Is it going to give us good financial performance? And understanding how you could impact along the chain of business process where you can best influence the output. And in our space, it's good health, good well-being, good safety, it's good performance in that area. And I think that's a skill set that we should focus on more. I think we often look at doing safety, and this is where you often get the term safety clutter. We just do more safety things to just do more safety things for the sake of it. And actually, is that adding value along the chain? And then is it giving you good, safe outcomes? And if it's not, then some good question about why you should be doing it.
The new IOSH competency framework aligns with that very neatly, that it's looking at the wider business now. It's not just about reading books and updating your CPD from a magazine article that you've read, or it's about really focused CPD, getting involved in all areas of business and how that channels into the health and safety market.
Yeah, I totally agree. And actually, I can refer back to, I can remember it now, a diagram that Nick Martins drew for me on a wall. He used to love his diagrams, and I still utilize some of those to this day. You may have seen a few yourself. It was a pyramid and an upside down pyramid, and essentially it was looking at, as you're in your advisory capacity role, you need a great foundational base and technical knowledge to carry out that activity. But as you go further up, I guess, the hierarchy, it's less about your technical knowledge, although you should have a good, great foundation. But it's then more about your management skills, and then your leadership skills and ability, and your ability to influence. And so as you go up that tree, your technical knowledge will tend to shrink, but your ability to understand the big picture and to influence needs to increase as you go up. And I'm very happy. You know, I remember going out into the farm beyond review in Scotland, and for me, you know, for when people are excelling and I'm learning from my technical team, I'm happy. Right, that's really good, because I shouldn't be a subject matter expert anymore in the technical details, because if I am, I'm focusing in the wrong place. But I still like to think I've got a good technical base, right? But I would expect all of my safety professionals that work for me to have a better technical understanding than I do. And I think that's something else if you choose to pursue your career in the way I did, and that was for a good part of it, to be selfish, to learn, to understand where the jobs are that I wanted to learn from, the big heavy civil engineering jobs, the people I wanted to work for. You know, I got that opportunity to shape the career the way I wanted to do, and to learn in that way, and that gave me great kind of experiences and understanding. But don't ever let the change of an industry, you know, whether you go from civil engineering to mining to petrochemical to roads to the rail industry where I am now, to Thames Water, working in production, it's all transferable skills. You can learn on the job, but the important thing is just to make sure you bring that learning mindset and continue that. So don't let the industry stop you.
Sure. So you mentioned Thames Water there, Simon. Can you tell us a bit about your time there?
So Thames Water was my first job when I came back from the Middle East. It was advertised a few years ago before I left Australia, and it didn't materialise at that point. But the same role came back up again a few years later, and so I applied for it, and I was fortunate enough to go through the process and get off the job. So I was the head of health, safety and well-being for Thames Water's operations. And so that was predominantly everything from above ground in terms of wastewater management and water collection and treatment, and below ground wastewater distribution and also water distribution. So everything from turning the tap on, where that comes from, how to turn the tap on, obviously when you flush it, where it goes, gets treated and goes back to the place where we can collect it from again, but in a cleaner space than what we got it in the first place. And that was kind of the whole life cycle process that I had that responsibility for. About 5,000 people in the business, and I reported to the chief operating officer at the time. Different job, you know. It was a client side operation. I didn't have the things, typical contractor things to worry about in terms of winning work and tenders and bids, and which was, I guess, a refreshing challenge. I think probably one of the most enjoyable things for me in a client role is seeing how much influence you can have across not just your organization, but your reach spreads. So you reach into your supply chain and their supply chain, and you can see the work you're doing penetrating wider into the business. So and wider into other businesses who then work in other contracts, and it penetrates further. For me, that was kind of a nice privilege to be involved in some of that work while I was at Thames Water, and that was for about 3 years that I was at Thames for.
Can you tell us a bit about your role and your current role just now at Siemens then?
So my current job at Siemens is it's a longer title. It's the head of health, safety, sustainability and environment for Siemens, which is slightly different actually, because there's a real focus on the environment sustainability part, which is a little bit newer to me from sustainability. I mean, we've had the small e, so to say, but Siemens takes this very seriously, and so hence my last embarking on some more training. I'm at Cambridge at the moment doing their sustainability course qualification, and it reminds me of the process of learning. It's hard work. It is very hard work, but it's very rewarding. The process of learning is tough for me, but the reward is well worth it. But so I'm partway through that sustainability qualification at the moment. But yeah, so there is a good equal focus within Siemens across all of those functions, which is nice, and it gives me something to focus on, which is different. Again, that new level of learning. But we look after quite a large part UK nationally on rail infrastructure. It's a really interesting business. Siemens are the high performers of the industry that they're in. The challenge here is different. I'm not coming from I'm not in a heavy civil engineering environment, which has lots of its traditional inherent dangers. There's lots of engineering safety challenges in the work that we're in, and there's lots of challenges around working on live rail networks, which is all very different. But I've come into an environment where actually the organization was performing quite well, and in fact very well, and there were some questions around how do we take it to the next level. And so for me, this has been a focus around marginal gains. If you think about a cyclist, and we're talking shaving seconds off the time, it's where are we? Where do we need to have a nip and a tuck in terms of our performance to make sure we continue to strive to move forward? And there's been some really interesting plans we've been working on. We've been playing around with some success on cause and effect KPIs. Mm-hmm. And this is where we look at somewhere where we think needs an improvement. We found that piece that we need to perhaps trim or tuck. We've created a KPI for what we believe would be able to measure to measure the dial from where we are to where we want something to be, and then we target that dial and target it hard, and then we swing that dial to a positive improvement, and then we do that for 6 months or however long it takes to shift the dial, and then that's done with. We've shifted the dial. We'll now focus on the next marginal gain, work out how we're going to measure that KPI, and then we'll target that and then move it. We will measure and move it. And one of my favorite sayings I picked up from from Thames Water's old chief executive was a term on data, analysis, insight, and action. And I think in our profession, we can't go far wrong just living by that principle. You know, we need to be informed in the decisions that we make. And that data is very simply, you need the data in the first place. But in today's world, in today's connected world, there's an awful lot of data. And I think it's understanding the wheat from the chaff of that data and being able to analyze it and really from that analysis, you're going to get your insight. Get the insight is going to give you meaningful action. And I think what we often do as a profession is we get the data and we go straight to action. We don't analyze it and we don't get the insight out of it particularly well. And therefore we have a problem. And what often happens is that leads us down certain rabbit holes. I'll refer back to a term that Nick used to say, and it's often, you know, when we talk about behavioural programs, there's a resurgence and an appetite, you know, from the non-safety community. I'd typically say, you know, those that are in our industry but not in a safety professional role. Though, you know, behavioural programs are often the prescription to the misdiagnosis of a problem. And it tends to take us down a rabbit hole when there's actually many other things we need to do first to understand, is behavior a problem and what part of behavior is a problem. So I think, you know, coming into Siemens, there's been a real focus on that marginal gains. There's been a real focus around targeting the nip and tucks, that surgical precision about what we need to improve on. But also not forgetting at the same time that we still work in a very, very dangerous environment with moving parts. You know, and I've been here about a year now, and then, you know, the last few months, we all know that the coronavirus and COVID-19 has added an absolute new dynamic to how we go about doing business, which has certainly been another challenge.
And can you tell us a bit more information about that then, Simon? What has Siemens put in place to manage the coronavirus and the fallout from it?
You know, it's probably I'll focus on what I've been certainly involved with from the coronavirus, and what was it, I think, as a professional and being looked at by the business to say, you know, how do we get people to work safely, you know, not at all costs, but how do we do it the right way? And you know, I must say I had a few sleepless nights trying to think about it. I'm not an epidemiologist, so that's certainly a challenge for me, but there's some basic principles that I came back to, and that's, you know, the hierarchy of controls, and how do you apply that in our risk assessment thinking to the coronavirus. I think the challenge at the beginning of this, and the challenge for everybody, that there was not a huge amount of government guidance on how industry should go forward. There was a 2 meter social distancing, and it was, you know, it was, if you can't maintain 2 meter social distancing, then it wouldn't finish the sentence. It's where you can maintain 2 meter social distancing. So there was a lot of innuendo in that, and people's understanding. But for me, it very simply was, okay, let's go back to the foundations. Let's risk assess what we're trying to do. Let's look at the hierarchy of controls. The hierarchy of controls says eliminate. So do we need to do the job in the first place? And then actually, when we get down to the space of PPE, wearing of masks, that's really the last thing to do. So we went through some excellent exercises on redesigning the way we actually work. And I remember one job that we were preparing for, it was a shutdown, but it didn't go ahead in the end. And we'd managed to identify 36 pieces of work that would have required to interact within 2 meters of social distancing. And with some clever thinking, some re-engineering or processes and systems, they've managed to narrow that down to 6 activities that would require to be within 2 meters social distancing. So I think it's great to have a little bit of healthy pressure, something to refocus the mind, and rather than do it the way we've always done it, this has been a great opportunity to learn to do things differently. And if we see this as an opportunity rather than an issue, then I think you can only be better for it when you come out the other end. The challenge now is we've had a few weeks of normality. The challenge is now, okay, we've got to start thinking about getting people back to work. What capacity can we bring people back to work in? So this is around understanding our office capacity planning. So given the current rules around social distancing, What processes can we put in place to make sure that we have, one, that we understand the capacity that we can return to an office. So if we've got 100 desks in an office, and after some assessment, can we get 20 of those desks freed up? And then the next question is, if we can do that, who are the priority to get back to that office? And then we need to think about, well, we're currently thinking about people's home lives, their home situation. Do they have the facilities to work at home? Do they have the right environment to work effectively at home? And if they are going to come back to work, can they get to work in a place that's, can they do it safely? Can they drive their own vehicle? And so it's the combination of looking at the office capacity and the workplace capacity for us, but it's also understanding the priority for those people. So risk assessing essentially the people to make sure we get the most vulnerable and those people that will benefit the most from coming back to the office in the first instance. So there's a combination of the two there, and that's the focus for us now.
Okay. And during this time, it's probably been pretty difficult for a lot of your employees, mental health wise. A lot of people being at home a lot more than they normally would be. What are Siemens looking at from a mental health point of view to try and support their staff?
Yeah, so we've seen this as, trying to understand the problem that is there, and we've done a few things. So we've done some surveys to understand where is it that people are generally finding the challenge the most. Is it around isolation, which a lot of it is, being on your own and not having that community that you typically have around you. There's a lot came back about uncertainty, and this isn't news to anyone. This is what we expected. Uncertainty about the future, job security. All the things that you would expect that would be coming up, and actually, things like PPE and the working environment, they're all way down the list. So people aren't thinking about the tactical; they're thinking about the stuff that's going to impact them, or is currently impacting them the most. So we've done that survey. We then we've taken that and we've done some what we call our global health focus days across the whole of Siemens, which is some real focus on leadership engagement, taking that and understanding what's it going to take to shift the dial for people not to feel like they're isolated, to not feel uncertain, and put some campaigns, some education around to make sure people feel more uncomfortable, having things like coffee roulette, drop-in sessions on Teams where we have open forums, people can just come on and talk to each other and drop off as they like, and just an opportunity to catch up with people. And then we're taking that a little bit stage further. So we've now got the feedback from some of that work that we've done. And then so for Mental Health Awareness Week next week, the theme is on kindness. So we have a number of sessions on taking the feedback from that focus day and getting people's support and buy-in to help, again, change that dial from that isolation and focus on what we can do to bring people into the fold a bit more. But also we've got some workshops from some people that we use that are around how can you be kind to yourself? What does kind look like? And then we have some panel discussions. I am on one of the discussions. And it's about what tools can you do? What things can you change? What are you in control of yourself? You can't focus about the virus, it's there, but what's within your control? And I think that's where you can get, where you can make a difference when you understand what's in your gift to control. There's no point getting frustrated in people that don't want to wear their, maintain social distancing. It can make you angry, but you can't control that. Control what you do and how you hold yourself and how you carry yourself, and that has a good positioning for how you feel.
Totally. So, where do you see yourself progressing to in the future, then, Simon? In your current role or moving forward in the industry?
It's a really good question. I've started to develop a passion, I think, for sustainability and understanding, what it really means. I either see myself challenging myself into perhaps a different function in that space, just to get some ignition in a new passion. But I also feel like from a sustainability perspective, a lot encompasses sustainability, and who knows where the future goes. But I think that the wrap of the bubble of sustainability is so encompassing that it covers so many facets of an organization and how they perform, that just has have a pull towards that at the moment. But at the same time, if for me, I think when is the right time, I'm not sure yet, but we like the international travel. My wife and I like the international travel, and so an international move would be fine for us in the future. And and I think some more countrywide, more global opportunities for bigger roles outside of the large multinationals in the UK. I think that's something that interests me too. Very lots of tactical and operation position at the moment. A very big team. We have our counterparts in Germany that have a team of one, and they're managing Europe or a global business. And it's a different way of doing business. It's a different challenge. It's a different way of working. So yeah, I'm up for a challenge for sure. Not to say I'm not challenged at the moment. I'm very well challenged. Certainly well challenged at the moment. But yeah, it's all exciting times. There's so much opportunity out there. Got to work through where we are at the moment, and then see what arises in the future. But I think the future is bright, mate, and the future is what you make of it. So
definitely, and that's great. And over the years, Simon, you've given me some really good advice in my role when I worked for you as a SHE specialist. What advice would you give to someone starting out in health and safety just now?
That's a great question. That's a really great question. I think first of all, I'd say to anybody starting out in their career, do some looking around, do some understanding, some research. And I think in our profession, don't be put off by stigma. There is, I remember joining in this profession and people saying health and safety and laughing, oh, I'll wear my hard hat then. Is that what you want me to do? And it's not about wearing hard hats. It's about wearing hearts and minds, and it's so much more than PPE. And I think people just need to reflect on that a little bit. Yes, there are industries where that becomes a focal point because it's a tick and flick almost exercise. But I think it's just to truly understand that our profession is more than just the sum of what people see it as, in terms of you wear your PPE and I do think that there are times we have to work through some history that's come from that, some baggage to work through our profession. When I see behaviour that's that's not great from our own professionals, I think we have to work through some of that and see our role. The role of a safety professional is different from a safety person. And I think when you come into this career, you have to be ready to learn. I think there is definitely, I'm very passionate about the need for competence. It's not just about experience. It's not just about education. It's getting the right match. And that sometimes is not easy. Certainly for me, I didn't enjoy the early stage of learning, but I learned to learn the process, and the reward is very good. So I think stick through it, put the hard yards in, and you will be rewarded for the efforts.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Simon, for getting involved tonight. It's been fantastic getting this recording down. As I said at the start, this is the first of many health and safety podcasts that the IOSH West of Scotland branch are going to start to roll out. Is there anything else you wanted to sum up on, or are you happy with the content that we've got so far?
No, I'm happy. Look, thanks for the invite. It's been a pleasure. I think I like to talk, so you probably didn't have to prompt me too much. And so no, thanks for the opportunity to come here and talk to everybody, and I hope you've got something out of it. And yeah, I'll probably see you very soon or sometime in the future.
Sure. Excellent. Thanks for your time, Simon. Thank you.
No problem.